My family mocked my small business as a hobby, not knowing I made more than all of them combined. You'll come back begging. My cousin laughed. I smirked and then bought their company. I never thought I'd be the one writing a post like this, but here we are. I guess I just need to get this off my chest. My family never believed in me. They thought I was wasting my time, that I was chasing a fantasy, that I'd come crawling back and beg for help the moment reality hit. But instead, I ended up owning them. Let's rewind a little. My parents have always been obsessed with success, but only the kind they approved of. In their eyes, success meant a real job, something stable, predictable, and preferably something that made them look good in front of their friends. If you weren't climbing the corporate ladder or running a family-approved business, you were a failure. I learned that the hard way. I was always the odd one out. My brother, George, was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. My cousin, Jake, was like his sidekick, always laughing at my expense, always eager to remind me of my place. They both worked for the family business, a company my parents and uncle had built together years ago. It wasn't some big corporate empire, but it was stable, respected, and most importantly, it was theirs. I, on the other hand, had no interest in joining. I wanted to do my own thing, even if they thought it was ridiculous. And oh, did they love to remind me how ridiculous it was. See, I started an online business. Nothing flashy at first, just something I was passionate about. It took time to grow, and in the beginning I wasn't making much. That was all my family needed to fuel their constant mockery. Still playing around with your little hobby? My mom would sneer when I brought it up during dinner. You should quit before you waste any more time. George would chime in, his voice oozing with condescension. He had the kind of smug smile that made it clear he thought he was better than me at everything. Jake? He was worse. He made sure to keep track of my so-called failures and celebrate them at every family gathering. Did your hobby get another customer today? He'd ask in front of everyone, his grin practically splitting his face. The whole table would erupt in laughter, and I'd have to sit there, pretending it didn't sting. But I didn't care. Not at first. It hurt, sure, but I kept my head down and worked on my business quietly. The more they mocked me, the more determined I became to prove them wrong. I knew that if I stuck with it long enough, if I kept pushing, something would give. What they didn't know was that my business had been growing in the background. Slowly, at first, but eventually I was bringing in more money than I ever thought possible. My products were selling like hotcakes, and people were genuinely interested in what I was doing. But I kept quiet about it. I wasn't ready to reveal my success, at least not yet. Meanwhile, George and Jake were living it up in the family business, bragging about how everything they did was right. My parents adored them, basking in their success. They threw it in my face, making sure I knew my little hobby was nothing compared to their real work. Then, one day, something changed. I found out the family business was struggling. It wasn't going under, but it was in debt, and my parents were beginning to panic. They didn't want to admit it, but I could tell. The cracks were starting to show. George and Jake, though, they didn't notice. Or maybe they just didn't care. Either way, they kept on acting like everything was fine, as if I were still the failure in the family. That's when the idea hit me. What if I could buy the family business? What if I could turn their pride and joy into something that I owned? The more I thought about it, the more satisfying it became. It was the perfect revenge that I kept working on my business, quietly, silently watching the company's struggles from a distance. It took months, but I had enough savings and enough resources to make an offer. The moment had come. But here's the thing, no one in my family knew. Not even George. Not even Jake. They had no idea who I really was anymore, that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. I wasn't the one who would come crawling back. I was the one who had been quietly building, waiting for the right time to make my move. And when I did, it would hit them all at once. I didn't announce it. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I simply bought their company, and I made sure it was mine. The day I showed up at their office, my office now, was the day everything changed. It was a quiet afternoon when I finally walked through the door of the family office. I had made sure to get everything in place, from the legal paperwork to the transfer of ownership. All of it was done behind the scenes. They had no idea what was coming. As I stepped into the lobby, I saw the usual buzz. My parents were talking to some clients, George was pacing around on his phone, and Jake was being Jake, acting like the king of the castle, his voice carrying as he cracked jokes with one of the office assistants. I stood there for a second, just watching. The place hadn't changed much in the years I'd been away. The same wooden desks, the same dull carpet, and the same framed photos of my parents' success on the walls. But now it all felt different. It was mine now. I walked toward the receptionist, trying to look casual, but my heart was racing. She smiled at me, like she didn't know who I was at all, which of course was perfect. "Hi there," I said, putting on my best neutral smile. "I need to speak with George and my parents." She blinked, as if trying to place me. "Sure, just a moment." As she went to make the call, I saw George glance up from his phone. His eyes narrowed, and he did a double take when he saw me standing there. I could almost feel the shift in the air. He wasn't used to seeing me in the office, especially not like this. But he didn't say anything. He just looked away, probably assuming I was there for some kind of handout or, more likely, just to ask for advice as usual. The receptionist buzzed the intercom, and within a few minutes, George and my parents were walking toward me, still with that same smug air about them, like they were about to give me a lesson on the importance of hard work and responsibility. "Hey there," George said, trying to act like it was just another day. "What's going on? Thought you'd given up on all this by now." My mom shot me a glance. "If you're here to ask for a loan or something, you can forget it. We've got enough on our plate." "Actually," I said, cutting her off, "I'm here to let you know something." I tried to keep my voice steady, though inside, I was practically bursting. "I'm your new boss." There was a pause, just a beat. But in that moment, I could see everything change in their eyes. George's face went white, his mouth working like he was trying to find something to say. My mom's expression flickered from confusion to disbelief, and my dad, who had been mostly silent, looked like someone had slapped him across the face. "What do you mean, your new boss?" George asked, his voice tight, like he was trying to play it off but couldn't hide the panic behind his words. "I mean, I own the company now," I said casually, like I was talking about some business transaction at a cafe. "All the paperwork is done. I'm officially the new CEO." My mom's face was a study in pure shock. "What are you talking about? This is insane. You can't just..." But I wasn't done yet. I let the words sink in. "The offer went through weeks ago. You were so busy with your own success that you didn't notice the company was in debt, and I stepped in to buy it. The family business is mine now." George opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted to my parents, looking for some sort of backup, but they were both too stunned to speak. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the realization that everything he'd built, the job he had, the pride he'd taken in the family's legacy, was now out of his hands. Jake, who had been hovering nearby, finally spoke up, laughing like it was a joke. "No way. You're kidding, right?" Jake chuckled. "You bought this place? You, the guy who couldn't even make a decent living off his hobby." I let out a slow, almost pitying laugh. "Well, Jake, looks like you were wrong. My hobby is now worth more than all of you combined." For a moment, I just stood there, watching their reactions. George's jaw clenched. My mom looked like she might burst into tears. My dad just stared, his mind clearly racing as he tried to figure out how he'd missed this. The silence was unbearable. And then, just as I thought they might finally say something, George managed to spit out, "You think you can just come in here and take over like it's nothing? You're a joke." But I wasn't going to let him, or anyone, undermine me now. I smiled, an expression that was part satisfaction, part cold resolve. "No," I said, my voice calm. "I'm not a joke, but you all are." The tension in the room was suffocating. For a moment, it felt like the entire building had gone silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. My parents and George were frozen, each of them trying to process what had just happened, trying to make sense of the fact that their little hobby of a son had outsmarted them all. George's face twisted with anger, and I could see his hands clenching into fists at his sides. My mom, ever the emotional one, was visibly shaking, her face turning red as she opened and closed her mouth like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "Wait, hold on." My dad finally spoke up, his voice rough with disbelief. "How could this happen? How could you? How could you afford to buy this company? It's not like we're just handing it over to anyone." I took a slow step forward, letting the words hit harder than I intended, enjoying the moment of power. "I didn't just afford it, Dad. I earned it. You've been too busy patting yourselves on the back to notice how much this place was slipping under your watch." My dad's face darkened, and I could see the anger bubbling under the surface. He was one of those people who never admitted when they were wrong. He'd rather dig in his heels and fight than acknowledge that the world was changing. "So, what? You think you know better than us? You think this is all just a game to you?" His voice was starting to rise. "No," I said, my tone quiet but firm. "I think I know better than you. You've been running this place into the ground, and instead of facing it, you've been trying to cover it up with your pride. I don't have to think I know better, I do." Jake, who had been eerily quiet until now, snorted and crossed his arms. "This is a joke. You're just some small-time wannabe who got lucky. You think you can run a real business? You can't even take care of yourself, let alone a company this size." I didn't let his words faze me. "You think my success was a fluke? Well, maybe you should have spent more time listening to me instead of laughing at me." The moment my words sank in, I saw George's temper flare. "I don't believe this," he spat. "You've got no respect for this company, for our family. You think you can just come in and take over because you earned a few bucks with your little side project?" I gave him a flat look. It wasn't a side project. It was a business. And yes, I earned it. Something none of you seem to understand. The anger in the room was palpable now. My parents were looking at each other, unsure of how to respond. They were realizing that all their years of controlling everything, of steering the family in the direction they wanted, had come crashing down. And it was my success that had done it. "Enough." My mom finally broke, her voice trembling with frustration. "This isn't the way to do this. You don't just come in here and take everything we've worked for." I didn't flinch. "You didn't work for it, Mom. You worked for control. You never cared about the company, not the way I care about it now. This is mine. I'm not just going to let it slip away because of bad decisions and neglect." George stormed out of the room, his footsteps heavy and loud on the floor. "You'll regret this," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. "You'll come crawling back, begging us for help." I smiled, watching him go. "We'll see about that," I said quietly to myself. But it wasn't just George the first had to deal with. My mom and dad were still standing there, trying to process everything. I could see the resentment building in their eyes. They were jealous of my success, jealous of how everything had shifted in my favor. They couldn't fathom that I had done it without them. "What do you want from us, then?" My mom asked, her voice sharp now. "What's the point of all this? To make us look foolish? To make us feel like failures in front of the whole family?" I looked at her, feeling a rush of cold satisfaction. "No, Mom, you've already done that to yourselves." I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a tearful confrontation. I wasn't going to beg for their approval. I had come this far without them, and now, with everything in my hands, I wasn't going to let them destroy it with their bitterness. But as I turned to leave, I saw something shift in my dad's eyes. There was fear there now. They all knew they had underestimated me, and now it was too late to fix it. I walked out of the office with a sense of calm I'd never felt before. I had the power now, and they knew it. The next move was mine, and I wasn't about to let them forget who was in charge. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The family was in chaos. My parents tried to regain control, but it was like watching a sinking ship. They had no clue what to do now that the business, which had been their pride and joy for so many years, was in my hands. They attempted to talk to the board members, try to convince me to let them stay on, as if they could somehow reclaim what they had lost. But the reality was clear. I was the one who had the power now. George and Jake, predictably, threw tantrums. George, who had always been the family's golden boy, couldn't stand the idea that his place in the company was suddenly in jeopardy. He tried to rally the employees, speaking as if the whole place would collapse without him. Jake, on the other hand, was still cracking jokes, but even his usual bravado couldn't hide the anxiety in his eyes. It all came to a head during a family dinner, the kind of dinner my parents had always prided themselves on, an event where they tried to play the role of the perfect family. But this time, it was different. That it was my turn to finally make the dramatic reveal. We were all seated around the table, the same way we had been for years. My parents were talking about the good old days. George was bragging about some minor achievement at work, and Jake was making snide remarks, trying to lighten the mood. The tension was thick, but no one knew what was coming. Finally, after all the forced small talk, I stood up. Everyone stopped, staring at me as I held up a document. "I think it's time we talk business," I said calmly, watching their eyes narrow. My mom's face went white, and I could see her already preparing to speak, but I held up a hand. "I'm not asking for your permission. I'm just here to let you know that the company's future is secure. I'm going to turn things around. I've already made changes, and I'm bringing in fresh ideas." George's face turned a shade of crimson I had never seen before. "You can't do this. You don't know what you're doing. We built this place." I didn't let him finish. "You built it, sure, but you never maintained it. I had to step in because you didn't see the cracks forming until it was almost too late." There was a moment of silence as everyone looked at me, stunned. Then my dad, his voice shaking, said, "You really think you're in control now? You just come in and destroyed everything we built. You'll regret this." I gave him a small, almost pitying smile. "No, Dad, you've destroyed everything yourselves. You just didn't see it. The company is fine now that I'm in charge." At that, Jake stood up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You seriously think you're better than us? You're just a kid playing dress-up in the big leagues. You're not cut out for this." But I wasn't done. I wasn't about to let them walk away from this without facing the truth. I set the document on the table for them to see, a signed contract that gave me full ownership of the company. The room went silent again as they read the fine print. They couldn't argue with it. The proof was there. George slammed his fist on the table, a vein bulging in his neck. "You'll regret this," he repeated, the bitterness in his voice cutting through the room. "We're family. You'll come crawling back." But there was no coming back for me. Not to that. Not to them. "I'll be fine," I said quietly, looking him dead in the eye. "I've already done more than any of you ever thought I could. And I'm just getting started." My mom broke down in tears at the table, the reality of it finally sinking in. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to accept that the one child she had dismissed, her failure, had not only succeeded, but had taken everything from her. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I turned to leave the dinner table, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of business meetings and tense family confrontations. George and Jake were still in denial, trying every trick in the book to regain their rightful place, but it was too late. The family's business had a new leader, and that leader wasn't going anywhere. I made sure the company flourished, and it did, beyond my wildest expectations. While my parents continued to sulk and George tried to rebuild his ego, I focused on the future. The real work had only just begun, and it was mine to control. In the end, I didn't just take over the family business. I took back my power. And no one would ever forget that. Not George, not Jake, and definitely not my parents. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole here? I get that it's a little extreme, and I've definitely burned some bridges with my family. But they were constantly mocking my business, undermining me, and belittling my achievements. I was always the failure in their eyes, and I was just supposed to sit there and take it. They never thought I'd actually succeed, and now that I've proven them wrong, it's a whole new battle that I'm really curious what you all think. Was I justified in taking control of the company? Or did I cross a line? Should I have handled it differently? Or was this my moment for sweet revenge? Let me know your thoughts. What would you do if your family constantly belittled your dreams, only for you to secretly build a business that far surpassed their expectations? Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more stories like this.